Thank you, those who are joining us. This is the River Management Society River Management Roundtable for the 8th of November, 2022. And today we're going to visit a topic that we tend to visit every now and again. We're going to be talking trash, but this specifically will be talking about approaches to intercepting and removing ocean-bound plastic and debris, which guess what is coming from our rivers and some down your rivers. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey everyone, my name is Becca Price and I'm the communications coordinator with RMS. And I'll just share about the river management roundtables really quickly if you haven't been to one before. We host these twice monthly. We have two different tracks. On the second Tuesday of the month, we are in the On the River track, so we talk about more technical and operational topics. And then on the fourth Tuesday, we talk about workplace culture issues and how to be more inclusive and things like that. And you guys are always invited and always welcome. And if you are not familiar with the River Management Society, or if you're not a member, we are a national nonprofit organization that supports professionals who study, protect, and manage rivers. So thanks so much for joining us.
Hi everyone, I'm Angie Furman. I'm the River Training Center Coordinator for River Management Society, and thank you all for joining us today. These are just some group norms, just kind of keep conversation moving along, staying engaged, asking great questions, making space for others to ask great questions. So just some friendly reminders today as we're going through today's topic. And now I would like to invite today's presenters. We've got Mary Lee Howitt with us, and we've also got Glenn Constant joining. And so I'm going to pass it over to them to introduce themselves, and then you can just take it from there.
Great, thank you so much. This is Mary Lee Howitt, and I'm the Deputy Division Chief for NOAA's Marine Debris Program. And our program is the federal lead for marine debris issues in the United States. So I'm really happy to be here today to talk about rivers. My background is I've worked with NOAA for probably over 10 years at this point, starting out as a fellow, something called the Knaus Fellowship back in 2008, and been working on ocean policy issues ever since then, but actually have a background in kind of water, freshwater, got a water resource management degree, master's degree from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and have really grounded a lot of my background in my work in the state of Maine, where I grew up and did a lot of volunteering for different river and watershed groups as I was growing up. So it's great to be here today, and I'll turn it over to Glenn to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Welcome from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My name is Glenn Constant, and I work for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm part of the fisheries program, and our office mainly does science support for national wildlife refuges, for ecological services, for threatened and endangered species, which is one of the things we'll be talking about today with Gulf Sturgeon. We also do habitat restoration projects, which is also something we're going to talk about today, and have worked with the NOAA Marine Debris Removal Program previously before this log jam project, doing things like derelict crab trap removal and other things out in the estuary, but never before have we gone upstream and connected with this program to help leverage some resources to hit our recovery objectives. So great. Thanks for the invite to talk to you about this project today. And I guess I'll turn that back over to you, Mary Lee.
Okay, let's share my screen here. All right, it looks like everything is showing. Okay, well, thank you again for the opportunity to talk to you today about some of the work we're doing at the Marine Debris Program to really tackle trash in rivers. And hence, the title for today's session is to try to talk some trash and some of the approaches we've taken to prevent, intercept, and remove ocean-bound plastic and debris from rivers. I think another potential title for this session could have been Why Rivers Matter, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But I imagine one of your first questions may be, why is NOAA here? NOAA is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. You know, we focus a lot on oceans and the weather. We're kind of seen as the ocean and weather agency, but we do work in rivers. And in particular for my program, we're concerned about preventing trash from ending up in the ocean. And to prevent trash from becoming marine debris, we have to look at some of those key pathways into the ocean, such as rivers. And as Glenn mentioned, we care a lot about protecting and providing benefits to trust resources, such as diadromous fish species, endangered and threatened marine species that may spend part of their life cycle in rivers, as well as particular habitats that intersect with freshwater and marine environments, such as marshes and seagrass. And then, of course, removing obstacles to allow for fish passage is something that we do as well. So here's an overview of what we're going to talk about today. First, what is marine debris? Why rivers matter? What we're doing at the NOAA Marine Debris Program to tackle this issue. And then we're going to give some project examples of some work we've done in rivers. And I'm going to turn it over to Glenn to dig into a particular case study in the Pearl River. And we're going to close with some future opportunities and questions and discussion. And I certainly welcome you all to at the end to share your experiences, in particular about challenges and solutions with the debris you experience in your rivers. So I always like to start out with a definition on what marine debris is. It's not an everyday phrase. It doesn't particularly roll off the tongue. But as you can see here in the slide, there is a federal definition. It's pretty wordy. And just to condense this down to plain language, it's basically any solid human-made material that ends up in the marine environment or Great Lakes. And as pictured here, this can include a wide spectrum of materials, from small bits of plastic called microplastics to consumer products like water bottles, caps, chip bags, food packaging, to large derelict fishing nets and abandoned and derelict boats. So although marine debris can include a wide spectrum of materials, plastic is the predominant material that we're finding in all environmental compartments and is a growing problem. And here's why, just to give a little bit of context of why this is a growing problem. We are producing more plastic than ever. And this is a graph showing plastic production to date and what is projected in the next 30 years. And the bottom line, the reason I'm showing this is just to make a point that we're making a lot of this stuff. We plan to make even more in the coming decades. And when you make a lot of plastic waste, it can become mismanaged and end up in the environment. And sadly, the United States is the largest generator of plastic solid waste by mass and per capita. And just a sobering statistic, in 2016, this was a total of 42 million metric tons, which is about 2 to 8 times higher than most other countries. And then one of the questions that a lot of researchers are asking is how much of this waste that we're producing ends up in the environment and becomes marine debris. And this is a really difficult question to answer because there is a lack of data. But a number of researchers have estimated the amount for the contributions from the United States. In a particular study by Dr. Kara Lavender Law in 2020, estimates that approximately 1 to 2 million metric tons of plastic waste that's generated by Americans ends up in the environment, making the United States a top contributor of plastic waste into the coastal environment. So how is all that stuff getting into the marine environment? Well, there are a lot of different ways, and I'm sure this is not unfamiliar to you, that the ocean is the Earth's ultimate sink, and almost any human-made material on land has the potential to eventually reach the ocean. Major pathways of plastic trash to the ocean include stormwater, wastewater discharges, atmospheric deposition, direct deposits such as dumping, beach and shoreline littering, and transport from inland areas by rivers and streams. And that's really why we're here, and we're going to focus on why rivers matter in terms of this particular issue and problem. Now, I don't want to bore you with a lot of detail and information from the recent literature, but I do think there are a few relevant points to make about some of the studies that are coming out about rivers and their contribution. And first off, there's been more research focused on rivers as a pathway in the last 5 to 8 years. And they're really looking at the amount, kind of the metric tons that is flowing into the ocean annually through rivers. And second, trying to really kind of pinpoint what are the rivers that are transporting the most trash. And as you can see, these first two papers, LeBreton and Smith, focused in on this and called out the top 10 to 20 most polluting rivers globally. And this was really based upon some modeled data. And then a few years later, LeBreton and Smith teamed up with Meyer et al. To calibrate this model with field observations. And the study shows that plastic waste in rivers is more of a problem that's widespread. It's not just a couple rivers, it's pretty pervasive. And estimated that more than 1,000 rivers actually account for kind of the highest amount of global emissions, with small urban rivers among the most polluting. And then came along a more recent study by Emmerich that challenges the assumption that most plastic flows from rivers into the ocean. And this particular paper argues that under regular conditions, plastic is deposited in the riverine environment, and there it stays until there's an extreme weather event that releases or flushes plastic into the ocean. And they argue that rivers serve more as plastic reservoirs than conveyors, and argue more research is needed. And so here's a picture that I took in the Anacostia River in the Washington, D.C. area. And if you kind of pull apart the weedy areas and the woody debris, you can see a very common scene of layers of deposited plastic bottles and consumer items that are caught up in the riverbank. And so this paper really talks about the amount of plastic that's caught up in riverbanks, floodplains, gets kind of entangled in plants, gets deposited in sediments, and gets caught up behind infrastructure such as dams. I think the key takeaway here is that I just wanted to make the point that this is a developing area of research, and there's just more data coming out daily. And more data is needed to better understand how all this waste moves in river systems and how they contribute to the global issue. So whether the trash stays in the river environment or travels to the ocean and becomes marine debris, it can have a big impact. And it can especially impact wildlife with entanglement. Many marine debris items can also be ingested by wildlife. It has been estimated that over 1/3 of seabird species eat plastic, and there's a lot of research that's been looking at what happens to human health when we eat or drink all these little plastic pieces. And large debris such as derelict fishing gear, vessels, and appliances can crush and smother sensitive habitats and impact the species that rely on them or obstruct their ability to access these habitats. And once derelict fishing gear is lost or discarded, it can continue to fish for marine species, including those that are not targeted by the gear, in an act called ghost fishing. This is particularly something we see with large fishing nets or with traps. And then abandoned and derelict vessels, these are just boats that don't have an owner anymore, and other large debris can become dangerous, not only for habitat and wildlife, but for boaters as well, with some sunken vessels or objects that may be difficult to see in the water and cause collisions. And a really significant example of this is just something that my broader office is response to oil spills. And there was an oil tanker called the Athos 1 back in 2004 that struck an object hidden beneath the Delaware River. And this resulted in the release of over 200,000 gallons of oil. So it can really have a big impact, particularly with these large submerged items. And then, of course, there's other things to consider with impacts. Sadly, marine debris, because it's moving around the ocean, can pick up hitchhikers. These are organisms that attach themselves to the marine debris and can travel to areas that they otherwise would not be found. And then lastly, it can affect our economy. Dirty beaches or rivers can deter visitors, affecting tourism and recreation value. And this is where we as a program come in. There has been, really thankfully a significant ongoing bipartisan attention and support from Congress on this issue. And the Marine Debris Act was passed in 2006 and then amended and reauthorized a couple times. But this is the act that established the NOAA Marine Debris Program and specifies that our purpose is to identify, determine sources of, assess, prevent, reduce, and remove marine debris. And particularly it calls out that we should provide grants to help accomplish our purpose. So a big part of what we do is support community-based projects through grant funding. And using our authorizing legislation as a guide, we organize our work into 6 main goals or pillars. And as you can see here, these are prevention, removal, research, monitoring and detection, response and coordination. And I'm not going to walk through all of these, but it's just a good kind of foundation to our scope. And it's important to note that our program is non-regulatory. So all the work we do is on incentives and working in collaboration with partners. And we're really focused in on solutions. So what I want to do now is just highlight a few of our river-focused projects before I turn it over to Glenn. And we funded a number of prevention projects with the goal of turning off the tap, so trying to stop marine debris at its source. And the focus of these projects is largely looking at land-based sources, such as single-use plastics that may become marine debris. And with these projects, we really seek to raise awareness of the issue and create long-lasting changes in behavior to reduce these items from becoming marine debris. And so these behaviors can be something as simple as, changing to a reusable bag instead of a plastic or paper one, refusing a plastic straw in your drink, or switching from disposable foodware to reusable alternatives like in this photo. And we recognize that, individual behavior can only do so much to solve this problem. There is just huge issues associated with the products that we have in commerce, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done with industry and other partners. But within our program, this is really where our mandates allow us to work most closely. And in particularly with our prevention grant projects, rivers and their watersheds are often a focus. And we've funded a number of river-focused prevention projects throughout the US. And one in particular was with the Alice Ferguson Foundation in Maryland. And this project seeks to change littering behavior of middle school and high school students, a really particular target audience in the Anacostia River watershed. And they did this through a series of different approaches with classroom visits, student-led action projects, and community cleanups. And this project was great because it reached over 500 students participated and 13 teachers. And it's just a nice example of getting the next generation involved and aware of the issue. Another particular area where we've funded a fair number of projects in rivers is our research portfolio. And we really focus in on complex questions about marine debris and looking at how marine debris is transported, where it ends up, and some of the questions around the economic impacts of this debris once it's in the environment. And one project I'd like to highlight in our research portfolio is with San Diego State University. We have a project that's open with them right now to quantify the debris loadings from storm drains and river margin sources in the San Diego River. There's a lot of different moving pieces in this project, but the overall objective is to create a mass balance of trash loading in the San Diego River. And a portion of this project is devoted to conducting interviews with unhoused individuals to determine solutions for waste reduction. And this is something new. This is an interesting dimension to this project, trying to understand kind of the contributions of unhoused individuals to the problem. And so you can see in this picture an encampment, and notice just the variety of items that could potentially end up in the river during a flood event. You know, buckets, tarps, sleeping bags, blankets, shopping carts, cardboard, as well as just a mix of, you know, single-use plastics. And this interesting project is also teamed up with a nonprofit that works with unhoused individuals to better address the barriers they face and provide support and tackle a pretty sensitive question about the contributions of these encampments to river debris. And then lastly, I want to share an overview of some of our removal work, and Glenn is going to highlight a particular project that is in the Pearl River that was a removal project, but we fund a number of community-based marine debris removal projects, funded more than 160 of these projects since our establishment, with more than 30,000 metric tons of debris having been removed over the life of the program. This is a pretty small drop in the bucket compared to just the magnitude of the issue, but removing debris can have immediate benefits to habitats, wildlife, and communities, and just gets back to my earlier point about where we work. We really focus our removal efforts close to shore because it can include some big return on investment. And a lot of those projects have included projects in rivers because of the connectivity to the ocean. And one project I wanted to highlight, because it is an interesting interception example, is a project we have in the Tijuana River on the border of the US and Mexico. And we've had some long-term partners here, in particular the Tijuana National Estuarine Research Reserve, and with California State Parks. And this project has funded the installation and maintenance of a trash boom that you can see here. This trash boom is situated in the Goat Canyon Sediment Basin in the Tijuana River watershed. And there's a rainy season, and when the water comes rushing down, this boom is situated to capture the trash. And you can see a picture here. It's estimated around 30 tons of trash is captured in an annual rainy season. So I wanted to highlight this because trash booms are an effective way. I think it's more and more kind of being looked at in certain areas of the country as an effective way to intercept trash before it enters the marine environment. But as you can imagine, there needs to be, you know, a rigorous maintenance plan to remove and dispose of the trash that accumulates. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Glenn to talk about the Pearl River project.
And for some reason, we cannot hear you right now. Might want to try muting and unmuting. Nope. If you try clicking the gear in the upper right-hand corner, you might be able to go into your settings and see if the microphone got switched up on you. All right, now try unmuting. You did reconnect.
Okay,
Yes, we have you
better?
now. Yep.
Sweet. Okay. Glitch overcome. Nice. I hate technology. Sorry. So I was on mute saying that I was trying to decide after Mary Lee's last slide whether log jams are actually intercept mechanisms, because you'll see in just a few slides they definitely capture a lot of plastic stuff. So anyway, it's always fun talking about projects that are successful, and I think all of the projects we've worked on that are part of the marine debris removal project are or great. They always end up success. How could it not be great to take all this trash out of the environment, right? So, but we never did, I guess, think about the NOAA debris removal program as leverage to do things like conservation for habitat, and that's what this project kind of ended up being. So it was a really great project. We obviously accomplished a lot of the plastic removal. We accomplished some of our recovery objectives for Gulf Sturgeon, which is the animal you see on the slide in front of you today. But maybe the most important thing, I think, was the collaboration and the partnership with the local communities. You know, a lot of times fish passage, NOAA has a fish passage program. We have a fish passage program, very popular and very effective programs. They're not always that successful at garnering interest and broad support for conservation from the community. But this project was a little different because we leveraged resources from both, right? And that brought people in, not only from the sturgeon community to help with the trash cleanup, but also from just the general public to kind of tag team this recovery effort for sturgeon. And we also connected to some of the other important local issues that I'll talk about in a minute. So Gulf sturgeon, if you'll flip to the next slide, or anadromous species. So they spend most of their time out in the estuary where the bright yellow polygons are down there in the Pearl River population anyway. And then migrate inland in the spring to spawn. And these fish want to get way upstream. And that's where the problem for sturgeon starts, here in the Pearl River, right about where that star is on the map. The Corps of Engineers, some 50, 70 years ago, actually, constructed a navigation project. And if you'll flip slides, you'll see this is one of the fixed crest weirs that holds water back specifically for navigation. So obviously, when the water's at this stage, sturgeon can't get over it, and we'll show how much we understand what that does for sturgeon in a minute. But sturgeon aren't the only things affected. That downstream of this weir is literally hundreds of thousands of acres of public land, as the Bogachita National Wildlife Refuge, 2 wildlife management areas, one in Mississippi, one in Louisiana, that are inaccessible for 40 to 50 miles because of these structures. And these are very popular areas. People navigate these structures. The 2 structures we're talking about are responsible for 7 deaths in the past decade alone. So there are many issues here with having these structures beyond sturgeon. So we reached out to the community. So if you'll flip the slides, first I think we have some of our evidence that puts us squarely understanding how important these structures are for recovery to sturgeon. For a number of years, this is some of our telemetry data. So on the bottom right, you'll see that for a number of years we followed fish around. We put transmitters in these fish, and we monitored their movement. And the bottom left, graph shows the peaks in that graphic represent over a 4-year period, 3 attempts that this one adult female sturgeon made at crossing that barrier, and 2 of those failed. So the graphics on the right simply kind of summarize many other fish over the 4-year period that illustrate that there's very low probability of spawning success at any for most river stages, making these things pretty clear impediments. Next slide. But once you start to look at the system beyond even those obvious impediments, the local folks, and this is kind of where we started to connect with the broader local folks and broader interest in the river system. Pointed out that, well, if you're interested in getting fish past these concrete structures, you might want to take a look downstream, because there's these huge log jams that accumulate, and indeed these are impediments to fish movement. But they don't always rank highly in terms of prioritization. When you look at our fish passage program in NOAA's fish passage program, that, you know, until maybe this year, now with the bipartisan infrastructure law, I think that Mary Lee's going to talk about that a little bit later, the resources have to be allocated to the highest priority issues. And while those concrete walls always fall out squarely at the top of the list when we talk about getting fish past those kinds of physical structures, these log jam structures, impediments, don't necessarily always rank that highly. The Southeast, in this case, we were trying to figure out a way to get these things removed, and the Southeastern Aquatic Resource Partnership suggested that we might submit a proposal to NOAA's debris removal program. And certainly enough, it doesn't look like it in this slide, but if you'll go to the next slide, you'll see inside those logs is just a ton of other small material, like the bottles and things you see here. There are floating houseboats that kind of washed up into this. So there's lots and lots of things getting trapped here. And so we submitted our project proposal into our fish passage program at the same time that the Southeast Aquatic Resource Partnership submitted a proposal to the Marine Debris Removal Program. And in our case, our project was eligible.
Hey, Glenn, I think you might have accidentally, yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me now again?
Yep.
Okay. Not sure what's going on, but I see myself and not the slide. So I'm assuming I'm on the, okay, I'll follow along on this copy. Anyway, so it helped. It was helpful that we were leveraging resources from the Marine Debris Removal Program. And I think, you know, conversely, our proposal to the Marine Debris Removal Program was considered more because we were contributing money from fish passage, and the local communities all bought into this and did in-kind work to leverage even more resources. So if you go to the next slide, this is where we went to work, and our folks in what we call our aquatic habitat restoration team, which are heavy equipment operators and biologists that actually do these kind of fish passage projects. You see on the left, one of these houseboats that floated into the structure, and that same houseboat being demolished by our fish passage folks, or aquatic habitat restoration team in the excavators on the right. So if you go to the next slide, this is a very interesting process. It was curious to me how we were going to accomplish this, but the way they did this was to use the debris, the wood, the trees, and in the main picture in the back, you see the excavators sitting on a pile of rearranged logs, and on the bottom left, what you're seeing is that same operator on his way back. So they had built this log raft all the way across the river, removed the material, and then as they backed away, removed the logs that they put on. Quite an impressive operation. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. We have video. We didn't want to put video in here, but I'll make it available. It's worth checking out if you want to go after and look at how they actually accomplished this. These guys are nuts, I think. So if you go to the next slide, we what we did was barge most of the man-made materials out. All of the woody materials stayed either on the National Wildlife Refuge or the management areas. It became habitat, mostly terrestrial habitat. But we had these signs to explain to folks at the boat landing what we were doing and exactly what we could accomplish. And it was an incredible amount of support. And the number of people who came up and read these posters, watched us move the debris. The local guys took care of most of the debris removal in terms of labor. The marine debris program paid for lots of the disposal cost, renting the machinery and so on, and our folks put in the time and covered most of the labor in actually doing the projects and removing the things and all of the prep work, etc. So it was really it got us a lot of buy-in from the community. I think it was a great team building kind of experience in terms of moving forward in support of where we go next for Gulf Sturgeon recovery. And because we leveraged so many dollars in in-kind services and from the different funding sources, one of the things we were concerned about before we did this, you saw all of the small bottles and stuff floating around in the woody debris. So if you go to the next slide, please. We were wondering how we would capture this stuff. What about all these? I mean, we were great at taking the houseboats out in the boats in the huge tanks of material. But the Pearl River Keeper does an annual a Pearl River clean sweep, and they just get volunteers to go out on the water in kayaks and boats and just collect all kinds of material. So we were able to support them and arrange that their cleanup effort follow our removal effort, the project, so that most of the material that got washed downstream was at least, we were able to collect a lot of it. And like Mary Lee said, this obstruction collected so much material. It was unbelievable. But if you look at the numbers, I think we did a pretty good job with the downstream backup team concept. That 2019 was the year we did this project, and the poundage for the Pearl River clean sweep was up in the 40,000 pounds of trash range. Like I said, because we leveraged so many dollars with in-kind services and multiple federal funding sources, we were able to fund that same cleanup effort for 2 more years. So it went a long way. They didn't get as many pounds the next few years, but I think, again, that was because we were kind of freeing up a lot of the stuff that was locked into the log jam. So the last slide will show the river. We still have a lot of work to do. We have not gotten out, we've not taken out the concrete walls yet. We're working on that. We have a strong support base, I think, largely because of what we were able to accomplish with this project. And so we at least, though, have the ability to look at this picture and see an open river where there was once a dangerous impediment to navigation and fish passage. So I think Mary Lee's gonna wind this up with a few more slides, but I'll be here if you want to ask some questions afterwards about the project or anything else.
Thanks, Glenn. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight a couple things. We have a slide here about bipartisan infrastructure law funding. So we, the Marine Debris Program, have received a chunk of money through that law, 150 million over 5 years. And then we have the National Sea Grant Program, also within NOAA, has received 50 million over 5 years, focused on marine debris. I'm realizing as I was listening to Glenn, I should have included information from our NOAA fisheries colleagues, because they've also received money for restoring fish passage through the infrastructure law, which I'm happy to pull up and share later. But the point is there's money, I think, for projects on the ground. We are certainly going to have several funding opportunities over the next 5 years. We are particularly focused on impactful projects around prevention, assessment, removal, and we just closed a funding opportunity for up to $56 million focused on the removal of large debris items. And we had as a priority interception devices. So these trash booms and other technologies that are focused more upstream in rivers and streams. So just kind of a teaser that we expect to offer additional competitive funding opportunities in the coming year. And just my next slide here is really to stay connected if this is something perhaps your river or your watershed could be interested in, because a lot of the work that we do is through grants and partnerships and collaboration. So here's a couple of different ways you can stay connected with my program, and as I mentioned, happy to share some of those additional resources that we have and competitive funding opportunities in other parts of NOAA that may be of interest to this audience. So with that, just want to say thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I think we have a little bit of time for any questions.
Oh, we're going back to some closeout slides. Thank you so much, Mary Lee and Glenn, so much. I know that we have river people who do a lot of work with trash, specifically with us today. So if you guys have specific questions, program questions, please ask them, and then we'll be sure to share the resources. So Angie, go ahead before we close out.
Yeah, we just want to remind everyone that this is being recorded and that you can find this recording on our river training channel. And also we'll be sending it out via email in case you want to refer back to anything or share it with anyone else. So I encourage you to check that out, and we can put a link to that in the chat as well. And then also just want to let you know that our next river management roundtable is on Tuesday, November 22nd. And that's going to be at the same time, same place. And for that one, we have a guest that's going to be talking about African American Heritage Water Trail. And so we're pretty excited about the discussion for that one. We can also drop a link in the chat for registering for that. Thank you, Becca. She's on it. So encourage you to check that out and join us for that one. And then also, I just want to lastly say, check out our training or check out our website. We've got lots of other trainings and events coming up in this winter time. I do see a question has come in. Oh, sorry, Becca. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I'll drop a link for a survey for this session into the chat, and we will send that out with the recording afterwards, but we do still have a few minutes and we're getting some questions in the chat. So I'll go ahead and drop that survey link that we can, I think, spend the last few minutes kind of talking about. John Savage had a couple questions in the chat, it looks like. And I don't know if, oh, go ahead, Risa.
Well, just going to say, John, if you want to unmute, feel free, because there are just a few of us here. Feel free to unmute yourself and just ask your question, and others as well. Or I could just.
Yes, hi. I live in Gatineau, Quebec, and we're getting flooded here. Well, in the last since 2017, we've had 2 floods. And when I first moved here in 2006, I was wondering why there's all sorts of debris in the woods all around the place, on the islands and in the woods behind. And then I found out when we had our first flood, it's basically because it's just like you said, it's washing down the river and ending up there. And what you said about how this debris collects along the floodplains makes you think that maybe urban areas could do more, or cities could do more, because probably a lot of this debris does come from cities as well, could do more to clean up in between the floods. So when I'm talking to my counselor, perhaps later today about this, what can you suggest that I tell him is the best practice for cities?
Yeah, I'm happy to try to answer that question. It's a great point, and certainly where I live, which is a pretty dense urban area, I live in the Washington D.C. area. You find a lot of trash in places you wouldn't expect it because there's been a significant rain event and it just kind of blows it out into the floodplain. And it's a little surprising to see such concentration. So I think it's happening in a lot of different places, particularly with more heavy rains on the East Coast, and we have a lot of flooding events. So I mean, I think there's different approaches that I know different communities take. Sometimes, there's regular cleanups where you just have volunteers that are picking up this stuff between kind of rain events to try to get that stuff out of the environment so it doesn't become mobilized. So, going along riverbanks and trying to get stuff before it becomes a flood event and is washed up higher ground. But there's also a lot of different techniques that are being explored in terms of those capture devices. So those interception technologies that I mentioned, I showed a big picture of that trash boom in the Tijuana River, but there's smaller devices. Some communities are putting those higher upstream, so in more tributaries to try to capture some of the consumer debris that's coming from urban areas, but those have to be regularly maintained, right? Or that material just becomes remobilized. So I think there's a lot of different approaches. There's new technologies coming online to try to get this stuff before it's in the rivers becoming remobilized. But I think it's a combination of, prevention for one, trying to prevent that stuff from getting in the waterways in the first place. But once it's there, community cleanups does help. And then looking at some of these capture devices to try to take advantage of those technologies to concentrate the consumer debris that's the biggest problem and getting it out of the waterway in the first place. So that's my attempt at that answer.
Yeah. Another source of the debris comes from the sewer systems as well, from across the river. The city of Ottawa, whenever there be a flood event, their storm sewers would overflow, and you get a variety of plastics coming out of the sewer system, and that would end up all over the place too. So things improved vastly when they improved their sewer system, so that they could collect it better and capture it before it dumps into the river during storms.
Well, thanks, John. Say Matt.
Hi. Uh, Thanks for that presentation, Mary Lee and Glenn. That was really great. And my, one maybe simple question, and Risa, maybe y'all have this data somewhere, but I haven't seen any really good supporting information on how effective cleanups are. I manage a cleanup, and I've managed lots of them, but it's something you said, Mary Lee, that they do, like, it comes back to this citizens just picking it up at the very end. We can have all the technology maybe to get stuff that apparently gets dislodged. Probably not on any of these rivers in the Northwest where I am, because that would be seine netting, and the rivers just flow all the time. But so my question is, do you have maybe through the grant program just some real great case studies of demonstrating a before and after impact of, like, when citizens didn't pick it up, here's the number, and then when they did pick it up, I mean, we have a 20-year record, and it's compelling. Although the strongest correlation is if you get more people, they pick up more trash. So although it's a long-term downward trend. So that's the first question, is if there's anybody gathering that, because I don't see it. I see a lot of sporadic kind of cleanup efforts. So that's one question. But I have a second one if we have time.
Yeah, I can answer that question. I think you have a great point. And this is why, kind of as a program, we don't usually fund kind of individual cleanups. We're really focused on those larger debris items. Sometimes community cleanups are part of a larger project, but generally the impact is really with the removal of some of those bigger items that are obstructing or damaging habitats. Now, I'm sure, many of you seen or been participated in a cleanup and you go back 2 weeks later, there's just more stuff right where you picked it all up, right? More bottles, more of the stuff that you would removed. And so it's a really important question. We have a monitoring program that's really focused on coastal, the beaches, so we don't have so much monitoring more upstream. But it is a challenge. We do have some projects that I can dig up that have looked at this, and it really depends on the location, right? Like the circulation, how is it in an urban area? What's the kind of the flow of the trash coming to this particular area that you may be going to and picking up trash regularly? So there's a lot of different dynamics. But
I've
yeah,
done the
I
marine
think
debris
yeah.
survey that I guess you're running when
Oh,
I ran
okay.
another nonprofit on the coast. Yeah, I know, and that's
Okay.
kind of what I was getting at is that was just baseline data. It's not perfect, but and I'm finding for the rivers, which are at least in high use areas, kind of exhibit similar patterns as beaches do. These pulses of trash. Sometimes it's recreational trash. Sometimes it's somebody dumped it. Well, one other quick question. So thank you. Anything you can share there. The other one was just this is more technical, but y'all, this conversation and seeing those sturgeon pictures and that great sturgeon trying to jump the weir picture, kind of highlight like impediments to fish or other kind of key species. And something that's come up in our cleanups is trash on the bottoms of the rivers. And, they, and specifically tin can or, aluminum cans by the tens of thousands. So these just collect over decades. And the question, and our fish biologist friend couldn't really answer this, but I just don't know if NOAA would get involved with this, is like, is it impacting, some of the slower anadromous, like the, whatever you call it, not the eel, but the lamprey for us, like will get in with the cans, but there's not a lot of data on it. And the big question is, how do you clean up deep can nests? And is that the sort of thing that NOAA would fund? Because like, it's a big chunk of debris. We've done it with divers. It's the main way. Handpicked. Takes a long time, but.
Yeah, that is not something I've heard about before as being an issue that we have funded or it's really come up. A lot, it's kind of the examples I gave are pretty typical projects. But it's something I can ask our research team about whether this has come up or if there's any sort of particular impacts to connect that would make it a compelling proposal. But yeah, I don't know if Glenn might have something to add to that from his perspective.
Well, yeah, I think those kinds of projects are maybe more viable higher up in the river systems. Once you get down to the estuary and the fluvial portions of the river, I think those kinds of things get covered up and just buried a lot, and so that it would be very difficult to kind of pull that off in the marine or estuary environment. But upstream, I think it might be. It certainly could have an influence on fish habitat. I'm not sure they notice it so much down here. We're trying to focus on getting the big houseboats and
I hear
craft.
you. No, that's good to know. Yeah, we're second biggest estuary in the country. It's the Columbia River, and but it doesn't have that silting problem. the cans sit there and you can see them forever. So anyway, thanks for answering that.
You bet.
I just have a quick question. Do you know of, so I live in DC also, and I'm very aware of seeing and hearing folks talk about where the river or rivers hit the ocean or the bay or the larger confluences. And I always feel like the upstream people get away with so much. They just let everything flow down and it's somebody else's problem. Are there any programs that are like an incentive? You can't penalize an upstream polluter when you can't prove that it came from there. But is there any such thing as an incentive to not drop trash to your low downstream neighbor? Or maybe that's crazy because it's hard to do, but it just doesn't seem fair that we have to catch it all and deal with it at the bottom.
The bottle bill in Oregon, which I think was the first, was created just for that. It wasn't virtue signaling. It was to stop it getting in the rivers.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that was 30, 40 years ago.
Right. No, that's, yeah.
So that's an incentive, but I hear you. There is also a talk here about regulating litter by the way they regulate pollution. So if you can create a point source for the litter, then, because right now it's not even regulated as pollution.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was hot topic.
No, I just thought I'd ask in case there's such a thing brewing.
No, unfortunately, I don't have like a specific, example. I just think there's been more of a focus on upstream sources, right? So a lot of the issue focus over, the last 20 years has been, oh, we have a problem in the ocean. And the research is now focused on where is all this stuff coming from, and like I said, more on rivers and these pathways and trying to work upstream to the sources. So I think there's going to be more and more kind of support for communities and municipalities more upstream to address this. And a lot of that is policy. And the bottom bill that Matt mentioned, there's a lot of policies in the works, particularly California has a lot that they're doing, and it's a state by state approach, but a lot of it is looking at what can we do more upstream to prevent the stuff from becoming waste in the first place and potentially entering the environment and then the ocean.
Like we have bag taxes here. Right. Yeah.
Hey, Risa, can I jump in with a comment?
Sure.
This is Fred.
Hey.
Yeah, I'm Fred Akers from New Jersey, and I want to thank you for the presentation. We manage a wild and scenic river that has upstream and it has also an estuary. And we, about 3 years ago, realized that we were getting a lot of heavy, large marine debris accumulating in the marsh areas. So we decided we should create a program. And one of the first things I did is I got your strategic plan. And I found that was like very helpful, and I stole all kinds of things from your strategic plan to create our plan. And one of the main elements that you put first was prevention, and we got right in with that. So what we did is we brought in an intern to help us, and we got the snail mail addresses of all the waterfront property owners upstream to the heads of tide, and we sent a communication letter to them pointing out that the issue, and that they are in the source area of the issue. And we did some tracking, and it was pretty clear that where the source areas were. We also talked about sea levels are rising, so people need to kind of mind their belongings that are next to the waterways so that they don't float away on them. And so we did that, and we also created an ArcGIS online mapping system where we documented the debris set the first time out. And we had two people actually go to the marine debris, and we had pictures and points. And we had two people contact us and say, hey, that's mine. That jet ski port that's on somebody's property is mine. And oh, I saw this dock that my brother built. So we were able to return those items to their owners. It was sort of became like the marine debris lost and found. So we've had some success with that. We're also doing a derelict crab pot removal program with Stockton, because Stockton has the grant connections. We're too small really to connect in. We have a couple of old large boats that we want to remove, but the prevention part of it, I think, is really the key.
Great, thank you for sharing that. I liked your marine debris lost and found example. And yeah, we work a lot with Stockton. We funded them for many years, either directly or through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They're great partners. So thanks for
Great
sharing
to
that.
hear.
It's great to hear.
Great to hear when your program is, or when your plan is being used, Marilee. Yeah, that's great. You didn't even pay him to say that. So, well,
Bud here. I wonder if I could comment on Risa and Fred. I think they both made a good point. There was an article in the recent Science News about trash and the sulfur-crested cockatoo, which is a bird that has learned how to open homeowners' trash bins. They're lidded and they actually pull the trash out. Now, what's interesting is that homeowners get upset by this and they try to thwart the bird because their yards are trashed. Now, if the trash blows into the street and goes into the storm sewer and then into the river and then into the ocean, that doesn't bother them so much. And streets are basically artificial rivers. They are tributaries, artificial tributaries of the river. And so you see this difference of responsibility. If you look at river managers, the standard is put a trash bin in the parking lot and they have an annual cleanup. But nobody goes farther than that. And it's trying to thwart the litterers and the dumpers. And that's where the problem is. We don't want to deal with the problem. We can't cope with it.
well, yeah, thanks, Bud. There's a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. But, what you provided is a great guide, and the fact that you're talking about having more money than we've seen in a long time that can be applied for, it's fantastic. I know one of the first times you reached out to me, it was like, hey, I don't know if our program fits your folks, but we have these grants. So it's great to know they're out there, and hopefully some of these folks can, or their groups can apply for it. And I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So thank you. And if you have any questions and you didn't pick up the email, please let us know. We'll contact you and follow up. So we want to be here to support you. But thank you so much again, Glenn and Marilee.
Thank you.
Bye. But yeah, thank you everyone.
Good to be here.
Thanks for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Have a